In this practice example, we're going to write a program that finds the mean of n numbers. We're going to use arrays. So we're going to use a one-dimensional array to just store the numbers in. So we'll start by creating the array, filling it with random numbers, and then finding the average of those numbers. All right, so let's use a preprocessor directive. And let's just call this length, right, for array length. Right, let's start with 10. Right. Now let's create our array. So int, we don't have to name it array. We'll just do that because that's new terminology. We'll make it of size length. So to create an array, we needed to declare it with a data type, right? Give it a name, and then give it a size. It's initialized to garbage. That really won't matter because we are going to fill it with random numbers. Right, so we'll just use a loop. I equals 0. And actually, let's just declare I outside here. So that we'll reuse it again down below. I equals 0. Right. I less than length. Right, 1 less than the length of our array. The last index is at length minus 1. Plus I. Let's increment this. Right. And then let's just say that array at index I, what we want to assign to that is we'll call the random number generator, which will generate anything between 0 and rand max. Right, well, it can fill that. And so let's just go ahead and build this. All right, I'm going to get a warning about not using it. And let me just do a run to cursor. Here. All right. And what we get is it's run through and it's just filled this with random numbers. All right, and if I were to run this program again, since I'm not seeding the random number generator, we should see that we get the same numbers again in our array. All right, so now we've got the array filled with random numbers. Let's calculate the mean. All right, so let's stop this. And actually, I wouldn't have to, fill an array with random numbers just to calculate the mean of all the random numbers. But of course, we're doing this as an exercise so we can store them in the array. At the same time, I could be summing them again in here as I fill them. But let's just go through our program steps, right, for practice. Let's put in our comment. It says, let's create an array. Right here, we said, let's fill array with random numbers. And now let's just go down here and calculate the average. Well, an average is the sum of the array, the sum of all the numbers in the array, divided by the length of the array. So let's create then some variables to find that. Right, so the sum, we need to initialize that to 0 because of the way I'm going to use it here. I'm going to use it in the loop that says, find the sum of all the array elements, right? For I equals 0, I less than length, right? Plus I. We'll iterate through the array, and we'll just say sum is equal to what's already in sum plus array at index I. So when we're done here, right, we have the sum. Now the average, right, if we go ahead and calculate the average as an integer number, we'll lose anything to the right of the decimal point. Let's do that. Average, and now we could print out, that's right, average, and the mean is the same thing basically as the average. So let's print that out. Let's save it. Let's do run to cursor. All right. All right, so I did a run to cursor. I had the cursor down here at the bottom, so it's executed the entire program. We can see we got the same set of random numbers as before. All right, here's our sum, and our average then actually worked out to be 60, which is popping up on the screen over here. All right, if I could say stop debugging. All right, and if we were to run that again, we are going to get the same set of random numbers. All right, run the cursor. All right, we get the same set of random numbers. We get the same value for average. And so what you do, like I said, is we keep running this with the same random numbers until we are confident that our program is correct, and then we want to seed the random number generator. So we get different sets of numbers. So to seed the random number generator, I would typically call that near the start of the program, not necessarily before variable declaration. So I'm going to seed the random number generator. All right, so we call srand, and then we pass it that time function, the constant null. In order to do that, right, I need to make sure rand is found in this library, and then time, I've got to include time.h here as well. Let's compile this. All right. And let's do a build and run the cursor. All right, so now we can see we got a different set of values, right? We seeded the random number generator. I still got an average of 60. Oh, well, I made a runtime error. I'm going to say nobody told me, but you know, when you're sitting here alone, of course, I have to discover that myself. Sorry about that. The average was not 60. So focused on showing you the debugger and not paying attention to what I'm doing, I made this error. Right? Our average has to be then the sum divided by the length. And let's just go ahead and use the variable we created. So we'll just say that's sum divided by length. And so I was printing out garbage. Apologize for that. All right. Now let's try to get the real average. I should have checked my data. I should have paid attention. Those numbers were big enough. The average certainly shouldn't have been 60. All right, so in this case, the average is 17,698. Somewhere over 10,000 looks reasonable based on the numbers. We don't have that many numbers under there. All right, here's our sum. And if we take the sum, assuming that calculation is correct, divided by 10, that certainly looks like the correct number. Now notice, right, we don't get any information to the right of the decimal point simply because we made this an integer. Right. If we wanted to make this a floating point number, what we could do is we could go ahead then and make float an average, average a float. And now I have to typecast this. So I want to say, just treat this then as a floating point number, right? Now, if I do this just to float like this, thing is in here, I think it's still going to perform the integer math and then cast it to a float, so we'll get a 0.0 at the end of the decimal place. Let's not seed the random number generator. Let's do this so we can work with the same data. So I'll just comment that out. All right, so let's do a build. Let's do a build. And all right, expected expression before float. Oh, sorry. All right, I'm doing what's called a static typecast. I was using a construct from another language, right, which was not correct here. Right, so build it, run the cursor. All right, so back to our original set of data, 41. All right, so now we can see that that sum, right, is 497 there at the end. When we divide by 10, notice then we're not getting anything to the right of the decimal point, and I really need to pay attention to what I'm doing. I thought of this while we were working, and then I didn't do it because I made the mistake, the typecast and not paying attention. If I make this a float, I have to make that a %f, otherwise we were getting garbage out of our output. Again, correct that. All right, so now let's take a look at our output. We get the default 6 decimal places. Notice we got the 0, right? But when I actually statically cast this to a float, it performed this integer division first. casting it to a float, after the integer division, it had already gotten rid of the 0.7 we would have expected to see here. But what we have to do is we have to cast sum to a float. Once again, using a construct from another language. All right, so if I cast sum to a float, it should promote length to a float, and we should get a different value. All right, now you can see we get numbers to the right of the decimal point, 0.6992. Fairly close to 0.7. Remember, there's some error in terms of floating point numbers. So by typecasting that, this became a float, and this did floating point division. Right. This promoted this. Right. So if I want to make sure I'm working with like types, I could have cast this one as well. I don't believe it will make any difference in the numbers that we get. Let's take a look. It did not make any difference in the numbers that we got. Right. Just trying to have matching type, not relying on C to promote it there. It did cast it to a float, right? And then we can unseed the random number generator to start getting different results as well. All right, so that's an example then, sorry about the errors, of how to fill an array, a one-dimensional array with random numbers, right? And then calculate the average by finding the sum, and properly calculating the average, not just displaying garbage. Right. End of this tutorial.